What percentage of a person's hard-earned income, no matter what the income is, do you believe is an acceptable amount for the federal government to confiscate?
I started thinking about this, and I started at zero. That's where you want to start. But then you have to respect the fact that there are certain responsibilities that the federal government provides to us and should provide to us, again, as provided for in the Constitution. I'm believing that number, and I haven't spent a great deal of time thinking about this, but is somewhere in the order of 10%. Think of what it is today. Think of the federal taxes you pay today. Think about the hidden taxes you pay today. Every time you pump a gallon of gasoline, there's more tax that is driven to the federal government. So the number of 10% sort of makes sense to me with regard to what that level is, but I'll be honest and tell you that I haven't spent a great deal of time of trying to think of what that number should be, but I believe that's where it is. I also would suggest that the way to deal with this issue in the federal government is to begin to remove the things that they shouldn't be doing to get them to that 10% level. We have a Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. that has an annual budget of about $25 billion. It's really $1 billion. 14,000 employees. And I would argue they're totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. Imagine another fact. The fact that the interest on the federal debt last year was $382 billion. Think of the good stuff, the good work that we could do if you had $382 billion back in your pockets. Think of the good things that could happen to this country. Thank you.
Todd, what percentage of a person's hard-earned income, no matter what the income is, do you...
I find when I talk taxes with individuals, what I hear more than anything from individuals, from you, the citizens, is not as much what the rate is, but what the federal government does with the money you send. In other words, if they invest it wisely in national defense, in homeland security, in veterans benefits, things that you believe in, you're okay. But if they spend it wastefully, that gets you upset, understandably. Historically, government spending has been in the 18 to 20% range of gross domestic product, GDP. You see proposals out there for a flat tax of 18 or 20% with exclusions for home mortgage interest, for other deductions, charitable deductions. So your rate's actually lower than that as being proposed. But bottom line is we need to be responsible. And one of the things I'm always glad to do is run on my record. And if you look at my record on taxes, it repeatedly voted to reduce the tax burden on individuals and citizens, the 2001 tax cuts, the 2003 tax cuts. I've supported legislation to make them permanent so they don't expire. And if you didn't get one of these sheets when you come in, if you look at the middle section, it's a listing with just a sampling of my votes against wasteful spending. I voted against the bailout of the banks in October 2008, which, according to the Central Penn Business Journal, we differ on that. My opponent embraced that vote and welcomed that vote, that bailout of the banks. I voted against the bailout of the auto manufacturers. I voted against the stimulus bill. I voted against the 08, the 09, and the 010 omnibus appropriations bill. The 2010 budget...
I disagree. I think people do care about how much money is being taken from their paychecks. I totally disagree. We should care. You should care. Todd wants to point to his voting record and the facts. The fact is, in 2000, when Mr. Platts entered Washington, D.C. politics, the federal deficit was approximately $5.6 trillion. As you sit here today, that number is approaching $13 trillion. Just today, it was unveiled by the former Comptroller General of the United States that, in his opinion, and I think we should respect his opinion, the Bush administration was the most fiscally irresponsible administration in history. Todd wants to talk about being fiscally responsible. He voted for 75% of the spending bills and the debt increase bills that went through Congress since 2000.
Todd, 1 minute rebuttal.
Again, the facts are important. There's been 10 votes to increase the publicly held debt, federal debt. I voted no. Again, the facts are important. There's been 10 votes to increase the publicly held debt, federal debt. I voted no on 70%, including the last 6. Under Speaker Pelosi, I voted no on all 6 of them. Once under President Bush, I voted no. 3 times under President Bush, I voted yes. 2 of which were right after 9/11, when we were needing to repair the military infrastructure and personnel responding to an attack on our nation. If you're going to take debt, it's when you're having a severe recession and you're at war. We had both. 7 out of 10 times I voted no on debt increases. An important distinction here is a vote that matters. The bailout of the banks. I voted no. It was wrong. Mike, as head of the Manufacturers Association, joined with the National Association of Manufacturers and welcomed that vote to give $700 billion of your money to the banks, as we treat it here at home. I had the privilege of chairing a subcommittee on financial management for 4 years. I conducted 56 oversight hearings during those 4 years. And I got kind of chuckled at when I would start a hearing by telling the agencies and bureaus and departments officials before me that as we get into your financial management and try to track down every dime that you're wasting, understand that I balance my checkbook to the penny every month, because every penny matters. That's how Washington needs to treat your money when you send it to Washington, as if it's our own, how we treat it at home, not recklessly, not wastefully. My record as chairman of that subcommittee speaks for itself, I think.
I did advocate on behalf of doing something to stop the death spiral that this country was facing. The White House, the staff in the White House made it very clear that if we didn't do something, Wall Street was going to collapse. If you think your 401ks, your pension plans are in tough shape today, imagine the collapse of Wall Street. What I find interesting is not the fact that we argued for $787 billion, but is how that money was spent, what that money was used on. That's where we counted on the people in Washington, D.C., our elected officials, the people in the White House, to make sure that every one of those dollars was addressing the problem. What happened was the administration, not encouraged, that's not a kind word, but the elected officials were not that watchdog to make sure that those dollars were being spent properly. We now know today that for every job that was created in Pennsylvania through the bailout, it cost us about $200,000.
Thank you, Mike.
Gary, we haven't.
Would you like to go another minute? Todd, go ahead, and Mike, you'll have another minute rebuttal.
I need to correct the record here. The bill that Mike advocated for gave a blank check to Secretary Hank Paulson. A blank check. It did not, when they passed it, they said they're going to use it to buy up the investments that were not marketable anymore. That's not what they did. They turned around and gave it to the banks.
Another minute rebuttal.
I need to correct the record here. The bill that Mike advocated for gave a blank check to Secretary Hank Paulson. A blank check. It did not, when they passed it, they said they're going to use it to buy up the investments that were not marketable anymore. That's not what they did. They turned around and gave it to the banks. You know why? Because the bill that the National Association of Manufacturers and the local Manufacturers Association, including the head of that association, my opponent, advocated for a blank check to the Secretary of Treasury. We didn't have the ability to rein him in because the bill gave them carte blanche. Now, I have supported legislation to rein them in. In fact, when they came back, it wasn't 787, it was 700 billion. The bill gave them 350 billion up front. They had to come back for a second. I voted a second time, actually 3 times, to deny the second half. The House, we passed the denial. The Senate, unfortunately, failed to take action, so all 700 billion went to the Treasury Secretary. Mike participated.
Once again, I think when we send an elected representative to Washington, D.C., we don't want them to vote or not vote and then go to sleep. We expect them to be there to represent us, to watch out for our interests. Each and every one of us, we have a job to do as well. We go to work every day. We don't have time to follow politics in Washington, D.C. We have to raise money. We have to earn a living to support our families. When I supported that particular piece of legislation, I hoped that people like our elected representative was going to be there to watch over how this money was being spent. Obviously, as we stand here today, that didn't happen.
Gentlemen, we continue on this topic, and Todd, you will take the first answer. As a congressman, on what things